So presumably, fifth column forces would have the goal of attacking critical infrastructure. They can conduct sabotage operations against critical communication nodes. You can also imagine fifth column forces engaging in decapitation attempts, essentially assassination attempts against Taiwan's most important political and military leaders. And these might not be war winning strategies, but they might be able to impose enough costs on Taiwan that might potentially make a difference tactically against Taiwan's defense against the bigger threat, which is the PLA coming across the Taiwan Strait against Taiwanese defenders.
You talk about the fifth column people, like China sneaking in, essentially guerrilla agent. It does make me think about the stories of military-age Chinese men crossing the U.S. southern border illegally.
Yes, and I've actually been doing a lot of PLA operational histories going back to PLA campaigns during the Chinese Civil War and even before, going back to the 1920s. And I think the important point to make here is that the CCP and the PLA and the Red Army before it has had a long tradition of using saboteurs, of using secret agents and double agents to infiltrate enemy armed forces to, quote unquote, they call it disintegrating the enemy from within. And so again, what the CCP PLA did on Hainan Island in 1950 is not anything new, and that and they've by 1950 they've had basically almost a 30-year tradition in using saboteurs, double agents, and so forth. So I think with this well-established tradition, one would expect that China would turn to this toolkit again, whether it's over Taiwan, and of course, as you mentioned, possibly having implications in terms of America's homeland security.
I mean, I suppose in the event of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan, they could tie up the U.S. by activating fifth column people inside the United States.
Absolutely. So I think when we're thinking about the defense of Taiwan these days, I think we do have to think about how that might relate to homeland defense, and it's both because of this potential for fifth column forces inside of the United States, but also because China increasingly has these longer range projectiles, missile systems and so forth that could potentially threaten the American homeland. And so, this is, I think one of the assumptions that I think we need to begin to challenge is this idea that if we're fighting China over Taiwan, that this is going to be an away game. I'm not sure that that's going to be entirely true in the future.
Do you think that the assumption is that it would be an away game because people don't think that China would directly attack the U.S. because they would want to keep the U.S. out of Taiwan?
Well, I think the question that you're asking is, what's the balance between sort of doing things that will guarantee American intervention versus doing things that will help to keep the United States out? I think it really depends on Chinese decision makers' assumptions about the United States, right? So if Xi Jinping and his subordinates are absolutely convinced that Washington will be all in one way or another, no matter how the PLA goes about attacking Taiwan, then I think my sense is that Beijing will be a lot less restrained. And that means that Beijing has more of an incentive to horizontally escalate, whether it's broadening its attacks against U.S. forces on the first island chain to, attacking further in, not only on U.S. forces on Guam and the second island chain, possibly out to the third island chain in terms of U.S. forces in Hawaii and potentially out to the American homeland. And I think one of the things we need to keep in mind here, of course, is a sort of an asymmetry here, right? The United States has been geared since the end of World War II in the post-war era to fight the away game. And so we're typically not well postured to dealing with threats against the American homeland. And so I think as a Chinese strategist, it would behoove them to think about ways to knock us off balance by basically going after us in places where we're typically not as well prepared and not as well structured. And that would suggest, again, Homeland defense should be an increasing priority for Washington.
Although there's a strategic risk there too, which is that it could be a Pearl Harbor scenario where Japan thought that they could do substantial damage to throw the U.S. off balance by attacking Pearl Harbor. And the result was that it just made America super angry and then, declared war on Japan immediately.
Yeah, I mean, I think, that trade-off, I think, continues to inform Chinese thinking. So, one way to think about this is to think about the costs and benefits at the strategic level and costs and benefits at the operational level, right? So, if you want to conduct a limited attack against Taiwan, right, that is sort of potentially strategically beneficial because you reduce the chances of American and Allied intervention. But the risk is quite big operationally because what you're doing is you're basically leaving American and Allied forces intact, right? The other alternative, of course, is to conduct a broad attack. You basically try to take as many pieces off the board as you can. And of course, that is sort of operationally efficacious, right? Because you're reducing American and Allied combat power at the get-go. The strategic risk, of course, is you're virtually guaranteeing American and Allied intervention. But again, going back to my earlier point, it really depends on Xi Jinping's assumptions about his adversaries, right? If he's convinced that the United States is going to be all in anyway, then I think the strategic risk of horizontal escalation basically goes away because it's basically baked into PLA defense planning, right? And of course, one of the key differences with the Pearl Harbor analogy, of course, is that, we no longer have the defense industrial base to make up for our losses. So, a lot of the significant damage that we would suffer from a major PLA first strike, for example, would be far more damaging to us today than it was during Pearl Harbor, because, of course, the United States had already embarked on a major naval buildup, right? In 1940, the United States passed the Two Ocean Navy Act that really produced all of the ships that would come into play to help the United States conduct the counteroffensive against Imperial Japan. We don't have anything like that. And so in many ways today, in my view, we really do have to fight with the forces that we have, not with the forces that we wish we had. And so, if you think about American decision makers during the Pacific War, including the campaign over Midway, a lot of the calculations about when and how you risk the fleet were informed by the notion, by almost a kind of a safety valve, that there was all this stuff, right, from the U.S. industrial base that was going to be coming online, and that deeply influenced how naval leaders thought about risk. Again, today we don't have anything like that, and so the risks to angering the United States today could be quite different from the risks that Japan encountered during the Pacific War.